Kathleen Kennedy has to be one of the most incompetent studio heads that exists or has ever existed in Hollywood. We come up with a rental income to Disney for $2.84 billion. $5.92 billion in gross retail box office for those 5 Disney Star Wars films.
And none of that included marketing costs, right?
Bingo, Nick! You hit the nail on the head. Renegade Online. So here we go. Let's go on. Kennedy joined Lucasfilm in 2012 as co-chair along George Lucas. Shortly after, Lucas exited and turned it over to Disney. And of course, he brought Kennedy in as a co-chair in anticipation of this sale so that she would be tied at the hip to it, foolishly thinking that she would be a proper caretaker of his beloved child here. Whoops. That didn't work out. She's credited with reviving the property.
Huh? Well,
that's what Variety says. She's credited with reviving the property. It wasn't dead. We talked about earlier, I put a post on X. Star Wars merchandise in 2010 hit records. It was 8 years removed from the last film coming out, and it was the biggest selling evergreen property merchandise franchise 8 years after the last movie had come out. By the way, that was 33 years after the first movie came out, and it was still kicking everything's butt out there.
Tons of games, books. I mean, there's tons of stuff coming out, merch, all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, it was doing fine. So yeah, there was nothing to revive there.
But you notice the language here is a little bit more sweet towards Kennedy than THR, which was a little bit more pragmatic. So she's credited with reviving the property, launching the sequel trilogy, beginning with 2015 Star Wars: The Force Awakens, as well as the critically acclaimed spin-off Rogue One. Kennedy has also charted a future for the franchise on streaming with television series such as The Mandalorian and Andor. I like how they say she charted a future for the franchise on streaming with The Mandalorian and Andor, which doesn't make any sense because Mandalorian and Andor, there is no future. It's over after season 2 for Andor, insofar as we know. The Mandalorian's never going to have another season on Disney+. Oh, and by the way, Jon Favreau was the one that did The Mandalorian, not Kathleen Kennedy. But again, you're going to give her credit for things that she didn't create because she's never created anything. That was George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Richard Donner and Robert Zemeckis and her husband, Frank Marshall. But hey, splitting hairs. Oh, don't forget Chris Columbus was involved in there too, especially with the Goonies. I don't want to get into a debate about the Goonies, so don't start. However, her future...
Well, Coach isn't here, so...
Oh, thank God. Yeah. I invited him. I wish he could have made it. However, her future with the company behind Star Wars has been a source of speculation. The Force Awakens remains the highest-grossing film in domestic box office history, with $936 million and $2 billion globally. But the triad of Skywalker-centric blockbusters experienced diminishing returns. It's an interesting way to say it. Some might say that they sucked and crashed. The Rise of Skywalker capped off the trilogy in 2019 with a still impressive $1 billion, albeit half as much as The Force Awakens earned a few years earlier. That might not have been a big deal, but it came a year after the financial failure of 2018's Solo, a Star Wars movie, which became the first Star Wars movie ever to lose money. Once again, they failed to mention The Last Jedi's failure. This is 2 articles, THR and Variety, that both don't want to acknowledge that Rian Johnson and frickin' The Last Jedi was the problem. It's what precipitated the failure and the crash of Solo tremendously, because that's what Star Wars fans checked out after TLJ, and Solo crashed. But it was not the only one to lose money. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. I'm going to play the clip from that video that I did 18 months ago now, because it's important for you to kind of understand that. Also at Lucasfilm, Kennedy also oversaw 2023's box office disaster. Those are my words. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the 5th and final film of the Harrison Ford-led series. The action-adventure, which relaunched the property after 15 years, was a catastrophic failure. Oh, there's the honesty. We finally got to some. Dial of Destiny generated $383 million globally against a $295 million budget
Oh, it was more than that.
Ultimately losing around $140 million for the studio. So again, these damn journalists, they keep conflating the words budget and cost. The budget for this movie was never intended to be $295 million. We would never heard. The original budget for this film was probably, like most other Disney fare, around $200 million. The costs exploded past 300. What Variety is quoting is, I think, the last known data set that our friend Caroline Reed at Forbes was able to put together. But that wasn't completed yet. So it's going to be higher. I have to go back and check, but the actual cost, and let me tell you something, the $140 million loss for the studio, they're shorting that at least $100 million. The loss for Disney on that movie alone was closer to $250 to $300 million, because what they're failing to do is they're not adding in the cost, the $100 million plus they spent marketing this movie around the world for months. So they're not factoring that in at all.
Reshoots and script changes did that thing go through also.
About as many as the Marvels, about as many as Doctor Strange, Captain Falcon DEI, Snow White. You seeing a pattern here? Lucasfilm has plans to eventually, I love this. I don't want to go through the list of stuff that didn't come out, because we already did that with THR. Lucasfilm has plans to eventually, in brackets, in quotes, Lucasfilm has plans to eventually reintroduce itself to movie theaters. Eventually it'll happen. The Mandalorian and Grogu, a continuation of the Disney Plus series about the helmet-wearing bounty hunter, is set for theatrical release in 2026, while X-Men alum Simon Kinberg is reportedly developing a new Star Wars trilogy. How many Star Wars trilogies have come and gone in the in-development hell ether in the last 6 years?
I'm still waiting on Ron Johnson's trilogy.
Yeah, so are we. There you have it, kids. You have 3 articles. You have one slight denial, but not really a denial, just calling Matt Bellany a man of pure speculation, which I think, in all fairness, seems to be a bit of a ridiculous statement. But they did say nothing has been decided. So technically, whoever the source was that Variety spoke to, that may or may not have had any information on the situation, apart from saying that, tacitly at least, oh, there's definitely some talks going on about a retirement, but nothing has been decided. That's what I get out of that. The pure speculation maybe is what? That it's going to be done by the end of this year? Or is the pure speculation that she's retiring? To me, it doesn't make any sense if you're going to turn around and say nothing has been decided. That means that a decision is trying to be made at the moment about her retiring. So to me, you've almost it seems like they've done more to confirm the rumor than deny it. That's just my read on it.
It seems that way from the way it reads.
Yeah, it really, really does. It's kind of funny from that standpoint. So let me bring this up. I think I must have. Oh, no, I didn't. I want to switch this out. And real quick, I'm going to play something that I recorded for a video, and I'm cutting to the middle of it. It's not the entire video. There's a couple of minutes in here in the middle that I'm going to punch this home for everybody. All right. I'm also going to put a link. The link for this video is in the description of this live show. Even when this goes members only, you should still be able to see the description. Let's go ahead and cue this up. This is from September of 2023. So let's walk back a second. $5.92 billion in gross retail box office for those 5 Disney Star Wars films. And if you've been watching us here long enough on Valiant Renegade, you've seen this breakdown before with box office rentals, and we know this from publicly reported companies like AMC Theaters that have both domestic and international exposure. We know that they report fairly consistently. Domestic rentals come in at 55%. International rentals, excluding China, come in at 43%, and China itself at 25%. And these box office rentals are what studios actually get back from theaters after places like AMC, Cinemark, Regal, so on and so forth, take their cut of the box office for exhibiting these films. These are the numbers that are most critical to Hollywood. If we break down all of those 5 Disney Star Wars films in that vein, we come up with a rental income to Disney for $2.84 billion. That is okay. So just real quick, I want to break in just to make sure everybody understands what is going on in that video that I'm showing, the clip here. Disney brought in $5.92 billion. No inflation adjustments, nothing like this. $5.92 billion. That's what Disney took home, or excuse me, that's what the box office at the retail level generated for 5 Star Wars movies. Okay? The 5 Disney Star Wars movies, $5.92 billion. If I pull this back in, Star Wars The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, Rogue One, and Solo. That right here, $2.84 billion is roughly what Disney took home out of the 5.92. Because a big chunk of that doesn't happen in 2025, that did happen in 2015 to 2019. Significant portions of each of those 3 films were from China. China pays back next to nothing. They pay like 20 to 25%. My 25% back from China, from the Communist Party in China, is being generous to Disney. This is about what Disney got back. And again, we know these kind of numbers because we were going to cover the AMC earnings call today. And they show us the largest theater chain on planet Earth, shows us exactly what they pay back to film studios like Disney and distributors like Disney. It's not made up, okay? It's not, we know a guy who works at a popcorn stand in a theater somewhere, or a manager at a theater, part of a chain up in Wisconsin. No, we're actually looking at the financial returns of the theatrical exhibition companies. AMC, Cinemark, Regal, we've done them all. We know what they pay. Disney got back $2.84 billion from 5 Star Wars movies. Now here comes the problem. What did Disney spend to make those 5 movies? All you people out there on Diz Twitter or whatever that don't ever seem to understand this, I'm going to try to explain it to you again. No, Disney has not made billions of dollars of profit on Star Wars since they bought it. It's been an absolutely cat-ass trophy.
So what then did the Walt Disney Company actually spend on these 5 movies to get that $2.84 billion back in box office rentals? The reality is this. For Star Wars, The Force Awakens, the Walt Disney Company actually spent $667 million US. For Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, $294 million. For Star Wars, The Last Jedi, $409 million. Solo, A Star Wars Story, $364 million. And finally, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, $554 million. That puts the total production cost the Walt Disney Company spent to create those 5 Star Wars films at $2.29 billion US.
And so here's the issue.
And none of that included marketing costs, right?
Bingo, Nick. You hit the nail on the head. That did not include one dime. Not a dime of marketing. That's the problem. And that's why when it comes down to it, when you start adding in probably between those 5 movies, I mean, on the lowest of the low end, that's not even possible, $500 million. Reality, $800 million at least. More than likely, we're probably approaching $1 billion when it comes to what they spent on marketing for those films. Meaning that more than likely at the box office, Disney did not even break even collectively on those 5 films. Force Awakens, they made money, right? Rogue One probably made a little bit of money.
I'd like to see you do a video on that, on all the streaming shows that they have actually made for Disney Plus and how much Disney Plus has actually brought in.
That's a little bit harder because a lot of those shows like Mandalorian are filmed in California, so we don't have the data. Now, the reason, and let me go back to this, and you bring up a great point because I don't think I hit that part of the video when I was playing it, which you don't catch in there. The reason that we have that data was not made up. Okay. The data is actually from the actual financial returns that Disney filed in the UK. That's been covered by Forbes magazine, not Valiant Renegade. Forbes magazine. We actually have that data from there. So you can't really fault me for that one. So this is the beginning of the
really cost the Walt Disney Company.
But my point is that in this data that I was presenting here, okay, $2.29 billion is what they spent just producing those 5 films. And that comes from financial returns that Disney actually filed in the UK. That's not Valiant Renegade. That's from Disney. It's not even from Forbes magazine. Forbes just reported on it. They were clever enough, Caroline Reed was clever enough to actually figure out what the names of all of these production entities, because they don't call it The Rise of Skywalker LLC when they're filming in the UK. They don't want anybody to know. So they give titles to these things that are more obscure. You have to know how to look for them. So we know what Disney spent. Now, here's the thing. One of two things are happening here. Either this is what Disney actually spent shooting these 5 films because they reported it. Not me, not Forbes. This is Disney's own numbers. Or if it's not true and Disney's inflating it or whatever other conspiracy theory you have, then you have to believe that Disney is committing fraud against the United Kingdom government. They're committing fraud against the crown because they're filing these reports with only production expenses. You cannot put marketing in here. It's against the law. This is production only. If that was the case, then this is what they spent because they want to get the film tax credits. So again, this is part of the Kennedy legacy of failure. This is part of the Kathleen Kennedy legacy of not only screwing up Star Wars from the standpoint of the narrative and the story and obliterating the fandom, right? It's not only from that standpoint, it's from the standpoint of she is so awful at being a studio head. She has to be, and this has been the point for years, Kathleen Kennedy has to be one of the most incompetent studio heads that exists or has ever existed in Hollywood. The difference in the past is when she was working for other people, when she was working for George or working for Steven Spielberg or working for Richard Donner or for Robert Zemeckis or for George Lucas, you had people that were, also executive producers on those movies because it was their movie that Kennedy was there to executive co-produce. You had people there that frankly cared about what they were creating. They were talented creators, and they were also going to be good shepherds of the investors' money that was being put into the films that they were producing. Whereas Kathleen Kennedy feels like she's the U.S. government. We joked about this earlier when Mark came in. This has been part of the problem, is that companies like Disney, especially people like Kathleen Kennedy, I guess, feel like, we're U.S. aid. We can spend other people's money freely, and it doesn't matter. Hey, we screw it up. We'll just go spend another $100 million to fix it because who cares? We're Star Wars. They don't actually respect the property. They don't actually respect who put them in this position. They just look at it as something that this is ours now, and we can do with it whatever we want. And who cares if it makes money or not? Because ultimately, who's going to fire Kathleen Kennedy? And we found out the answer to that question was apparently nobody.
2 questions. One, what do you think the total marketing on all those movies were? I'm guessing it's probably maybe a little less than half of that, maybe around $1 billion.
Probably around $1 billion.
Yeah. And
probably close to it. I mean, 5 movies where they're spending that much, at the very least, that's why I was saying on the low end, on the very low end, $500 million. On the ridiculously low end, $500 million. Realistically, I think probably around 700 to 800 million totally.
Yeah, so you're looking at basically $3 billion.
Yeah.
And then the second thing, isn't crimes against the crown punishable by death over there?
Maybe they still lock you in the Tower of London.
Yeah.
This is my point. I don't want to be very clear about this. You can't argue these numbers because these are Disney's numbers. I don't think that Disney's committing fraud. I think this is what they spent. I think these are the costs that they truly attributed to these 5 productions combined. I think that's what they truly are, not even including marketing, because we know how many times they reshot Rise of Skywalker, and how many times they redid Rogue One all over again. They redid Solo all over again. I mean, it's not an accident that The Last Jedi, the first one they did, or the second one they did, was the first movie that they did that came in that came in around $300 million, right?
Yeah.
Because they let Rian Johnson do what he wanted. Kathleen Kennedy didn't question it because it was absolute shit, and they peed all over Luke Skywalker, and she probably loved it. And she said, perfect, we don't need to change a thing. And they let it go. And then it's the movie, it's like, congratulations, the movie that you spent the least amount of money on and thought was going to be the best is the one that absolutely destroyed Star Wars. That was it. In 2017, it was over. It was done.
Yeah.
It was done.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.